The following is a presentation of the ForceCenter podcast feed.
From the center of the galaxy, this is the ForceCenter podcast feed, and this particular episode is Q's of the Force. The Q stands for questions, and Force is the word force from the film franchise Star Wars. Anyway, I'm Joseph Scrimshaw.
I'm Ken Napzok. I'm just here for these intros. I've got A's for the Q's. I've got the Force in my veins. Let's do it.
Soon it will be questions O the Force, and there'll be a entirely different vibe. Anyway, we want to let you know that, as always, today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. Over 180,000 titles, 80,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. We are continuing to recommend Path to Deceit by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland, the beginning of Phase 2 of High Republic. If you want to download your free audiobook today, you can do it by going to audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. One more time, that's audibletrial.com/ForceCenter for your free audio book. And as we're looking at a decent amount of expenses for a wonderful, lucky trip to London for Star Wars Celebration, a gentle reminder that downloading a free audiobook helps us massively, and it is free.
It's totally free, and you can opt out after. Yes, indeed.
Exactly. So that's our first A, our Audible A, but we have a second A. Ken, do you want to share our second A?
Oh, we all got a second A, and it's an ask. It's our current ask. It's our current ask. And as a lot of you know over the last couple of weeks, we are building our YouTube presence. You can make jokes about now, but no, it's still good. It's still going. We got some great things we're working on, including our new series. It's YouTube only, called Figure Fights. The first episode will be dropping very soon here in February, and we want you to be a part of the growth on YouTube and help us grow. Yes, that's right. It's a symbiote relationship here. Symbiotic relationship, as Kenobi would remind us. We would love to have you subscribe if you'd like to. If you haven't already, we're trying to reach 7,000 subscribers. We're inching closer and closer. And once you get those numbers, it starts becoming easier to get the other numbers. That's how YouTube works, unfortunately. So we appreciate all of your support over the years. And if you'd like to make that jump with us to the video side on some new special shows, do so by subscribing on YouTube. There you go.
That's right. And if you're subscribed on YouTube, you'll be all ready for our next live Q&A, which is this Friday, January 27th, 3 p.m. Pacific time. You like Q's, you like A's. Well, this is all about Q's and A's. It's also just kind of a fun hangout that we've been doing for the last several months, where we get to talk Star Wars, sometimes a sip of beverage of some kind. And this month in particular is going to be different and special and fun because we have some reveals from Gentle Giant, that some wonderful things sent to us that we're going to share. It's going to be a Q&A and a show and tell, a Q&A and an S&T.
That is right. I'm so excited to finally open those up. We'll reveal what on that day.
Yeah, exactly. But with all that out of the way, we're going to get into our Q's. We have two questions from Twitter and two from our patrons on Patreon. We go first, as always, to Twitter. And this one comes to us from The Sabersmith. The Sabersmith says, what ship would you want as your personal vehicle? And I'm very charmed because the way the Sabersmith made the choice to write this out, the letters of each, the first letter of each word is capitalized. So not only is it a really fun Star Wars question, but it sounds like a novelty song from the 50s. What ship would you want as your personal vehicle? The wonderful way this is written out.
Yeah, I was going to say song title indeed to me. This is great. And it's, I got confused for a second. We have a question coming up you'll all understand, but I thought the Sabersmith asked that other question. I forgot. I got confused for a second. You'll see why.
Yeah, we know we got a saber question. We got a ship question, but the Sabersmith sent us a ship question, which is a great tongue twister. But anyway, to the question, Ken, what ship would you want as your personal vehicle?
So my answer is pretty direct and easy. The Razor Crest. All right. And yeah. And everyone knows, I'm a Y-Wing fan, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course I am. I like N1 starfighters. Of course, that would be good. But I took this question as this is your vehicle, right? This is what you're in the galaxy, and you're traveling around the galaxy. You're living that nomad lifestyle, going from system to system. The Millennium Falcon, of course, is a particularly good ship for that kind of travel. But I really think, and I'll say this, I have two answers, but my gut reaction, Razor Quest, it might be the most perfect solo, no pun intended, travel van in space. I grew up with, at one point in my life, we had two separate VW vans, Volkswagen vans as a kid. My dad collected VW vans back in the day, no longer does. And that's a Razor Crest. No matter anywhere you slice it, it's a space VW van, and you can sleep in it, pop that tent up, you can get around. You got some armaments on. It's a little faster than a Volkswagen van. This I can tell you that. It's got a nice, comfy cockpit. I love the design. I absolutely love the Razor Crest.
Yeah, the Razor Crest is a really, really good choice. I believe there are shots that expose that Din's toilet is just kind of out in the open. That I would need to change.
Yeah, but if it's just you and your soul, you're okay.
I at least need a curtain. I need to hide from myself. Maybe I need to work through some issues. I don't know. That's the only downside to me of the Razor Crest. I need a modified one with a bathroom door. Yeah, that's a really great selection. My mind went to the Falcon because of the familiarity. And I think the fact that the Falcon is this great combination of, it's kind of a racing car, right? It's so much more powerful than it looks on the outside and all this great stuff. But then we know it so well in terms of kind of the living space, right? The common area, the bedroom, where you play games, the kitchenette that Han installed as a fumbling, poorly received wedding gift to Leia. All that great stuff. But kind of wanted to go somewhere else too. So like some of my favorite ships are, the X-Wing, the Delta 7 Jedi Interceptor. But those are like the world's or the galaxy's absolutely coolest smart cars of like 75% of the time be great because you don't need to get around but with nothing but yourself and your droid, right? But then there's few times for me like I need to haul some props or some set pieces right. Or some in-laws like yeah. So I realized I needed something bigger, so this is strangely what I went with, Ken. The Mandalorian Gauntlet Fighter. It's one of my favorite ship designs. It's mostly from animation. We've seen it parked in live action in The Mandalorian, and from The Mandalorian Season 3 trailer, we're going to see it live action, full action. Very excited. It looks super cool, right? It's like super pointy, daggery, streamlined, great, amazing. I looked it up on Wikipedia. There's space for up to 24 people.
Ooh.
It's a party bus, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But then the other thing I was really looking at, if you're trying to be a little bit realistic, is parking. And the fact that the Mandalorian Gauntlet Fighter's wings fold up, it's so easy to park, right? You don't have to be making judgment room about the room for the wings. Fold up, and it's got a very simple, small outline there. So that's what I'm going with.
I love that answer. That's a fascinating ship that I think I overlook sometimes, not just because it's animation, kids, but just I don't spend a lot of time in the Mando culture in my fandom, right? But now I have to, and I have, thanks to Clone Wars and Filoni and team. So yeah, I think that's a great answer there.
Yeah, it's such a cool looking ship, and it looks small, but 24 people, big old party on Joseph's Gauntlet Fighter.
Yeah. Well, I had a backup choice because I thought there was a good shot that you might have the Razor Crest as well. You're a fan of the ship. So I thought, keep it in that vibe, traveling around by yourself. Because look, I have some questions. People have made jokes after Mando Din Djarin grabbed the N1. But I think they're jokes, but also great questions of, well, how's that going to work? If he was to remain a bounty hunter, how do you carry the bounties? It's different than the Razor Crest. You got Grogu in the bubble, but now we see Grogu in the cockpit as well. Like, how do you have to always look for a travel lodge? You can't pull off the side of the road and sleep. Like, I don't know how it works. So I that's why I want the Razor Crest. But I was like, in the same vein, on the off chance that you had the Razor Crest, it's not as cool. It's not as sleek. It was originally going to be called a T-Wing, but it's the MG-100 Star Fortress.
Ooh.
Convert that to an RV. Bring some friends along. And I think you got yourself a slow but steady ship to get around the galaxy.
Yeah, and you convert some of those bomb racks to store your food and drink. You got frozen burritos.
Oh, yeah, going into the wine cellar, but it's your ship.
Yeah, you got bottles of whiskey, and you can lower them.
Oh yeah, You go into those, it is Star Wars. You got to probably keep some armaments there. Probably have some lasers, but you go down to that the bubble that the great Paige Tico was in, and you just kind of write some poems while you stare out into the vastness of space.
Oh yeah, that's a reading nook right there, right? That bubble, that's for reading.
Oh, that's exactly it. So, again, I probably assume I'm traveling alone, but you've got the Gauntlet fighter with 24 friends with you. I'll throw some friends here as well, and we can have. I bet that converts just nicely into got some bunk beds. It's a good tour. Like you could be a space rock band, and that could be a tour bus.
Oh yeah, I could also probably just use it as a storage space. I was like, oh man.
Or all my MG100 Star Fortress toys I have. Yes,
exactly. I could store my Razor Crest in my Gauntlet fighter. Then we'd be all set. That's a very fun question. Thank you, Sabersmith. And we're going to move on from Sabersmith to a Saber question. This one comes to us from James Pasqualucci. James says, hello there, ForceCenter. To ask this question, I must follow in Ken's footsteps and make a Game of Thrones reference. Jaime Lannister tells Brienne that the best swords have names. Swords like Needle and Oathkeeper both have names that reflect their wielders. Arya's unassuming but proficient nature and Brienne's honor-bound nature, respectively. This is an element used not just in Game of Thrones, but many fantasy stories I love. All this is to ask, do you think there was or will be a Jedi who named their saber, and why? If this weapon is their life, and in a way, living via the Kyber crystal, why not name it? Ooh, I love this question, Ken. I'm going to throw out there just at the top that I feel like the closest thing in Star Wars to this, to naming your sword in modern canon, is the Darksaber. That's definitely, a blade that has a name and has been passed down the way swords often are in fantasy. But I like that we don't fully know the story that did, the first Mandalorian Jedi who forged the Darksaber, did they name it the Darksaber, or is that a name that grew in legend? That's a thing that we don't know yet. If that Mandalorian Jedi kind of broke with tradition and is like, I made it, and walks out like, this is the Darksaber, everybody. Or if in legend it became known as the Darksaber.
Ooh, by its act, by its acts and reputation. Ooh,
yeah. Do you have a take on that? A headcanon that whether you think it was forged with that name or whether the name grew up around its legend?
I could see it's what Tar Vizsla does it, right? So I see both sides where because he's a Mandalorian Jedi, which that itself is unique, especially at the time. He might say, look, this is the name, it represents me, but also what happens, the results, and Mando Jedi Wars, and maybe the saber gained that kind of reputation of, that Darksaber, it turned things real bad around these parts, and maybe that's how it got the name. And I almost would prefer that.
Yeah, I think that's more interesting to me, that a legend grew up around it and the whispers of the Darksaber and what it means. And it's so much more of the Mandalorian culture to name a weapon, right? Din's great, kind of jokey, but absolutely true line in The Mandalorian of, religions are our weapons are our religion. Right. That the Mandalorian culture would name it is really interesting.
Absolutely.
So let's get into this, because it is, to me, about Jedi culture, that Jedi don't name their blades. What do you think is a reason that the Jedi might do this? Why do you think they don't do this? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I went to the don't. I went negative first here before getting to James' direct question. I think you're probably with me here, Joseph. Lightsabers, obviously considered an extension of the Jedi. The Kyber crystal, we know, is kind of almost alive in a way. Calls to him, connects. There's a lot of that stuff that we've gained over the years, and we know more than we did growing up. So that's kind of cool. But I think there could be issues of attachment to the blade, or perhaps even too much separation if you name it, right? Like, no, you're supposed to be attached to the blade. So naming it Bob the Blade means you consider it different than you. And that doesn't work. You have to be more flowing and connect with it. And maybe if it's Bob the Blade, not a name I'm truly suggesting, but you might consider it something else, something, a weapon that you wield, as opposed to it being an extension of you. And your life, as Obi-Wan would say. So I think I start with all those kind of reasons, and I'm sure you'll dive in deeper or echo those thoughts there. But all that to say, and we'll answer James' questions after I pitch back to you here. But yes, I would love to have a rebellious, rule-bending Jedi. I'd be like, nope, I'm going to name a saber. What y'all think about that, Jedi Council?
I love that, and I definitely wanted to discuss that. But we'll get the negativity out of the way about the why not, and maybe there's some positivity in the negativity. I love the way that you're saying it is an extension of the Jedi. So why create that separation, even if it is out of love and respect for the Kyber crystal? Why separate it from yourself? I also think that a reason that the Jedi would maybe not want to get into naming weapons is because there can be positive examples of it building identity. I think James's examples of the characters from Game of Thrones, it is building their identity. But I also think that there's a possibility that it's about myth building, right? It's about bestowing even more power and ego onto the weapon, right? Which is it's to me, it's dabbling with a kind of vanity, to walk into the room and say, I am Plo Koon, I am a servant of the light, and here is my blade, the light maker. Like, okay, cool. Did you mean well by that? But it starts to create this sort of aura around the weapon and the importance of the weapon, as opposed to it being, like you said so well, an extension of the Jedi who are in touch with their identity, but are also wanting to balance having an individual identity with, we're all part of the Force. I'm a part of the Jedi. I'm a part of the galaxy. I'm a part of the light side. I'm a part of all these other things, as well as being my own being. There's a real vanity in saying, I'm Plo Koon, and this is my, wolf's tooth.
I want this one. Lightbringer. There you go. Which is Game of Thrones as well. I was thinking that the example, that we finally got to see with Dooku and Tales of the Jedi, which is the old story Filoni told him of his meeting with George, and a lightsaber would be put on a table by a Jedi during negotiations. It doesn't it kind of change it if Dooku's like, yep, all right, this is Death's Whale. What? Like, what are you here for? It does myth building or adding just and this is maybe my point of view, and I do love Swords with Names. It's funny. I always have something idly in my hands while I'm talking. I'm playing with Sting, Frodo's. I have a tiny little 4-inch figure. You know what I mean? Like it turns into a weapon to me more than part of the whole Jedi justice and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I also think, you and I have both talked about growing up in cultures, in families that have a fine balance on sort of self-promotion, right? I think I grew up in culture and in some family stuff that's like, you do something awesome and then let other people decide whether it's awesome. You just go be your best self. And if it is worthy of recognition and celebration, other people will do that, right?
Yes,
and I don't think that's I don't think that's entirely healthy in the real world. Don't need to go down that road and do self-counseling on the podcast. But I think from the Jedi perspective, there's this like, we're not here for accolades. We're here to serve other people. And I feel like by naming something, it's asking other people, it's telling other people they should celebrate your weapon. You should know its name. Its legend is important, and you should know it. It feels like kind of telling other people how to receive your blade.
I'll go to some real world stuff, and I'm kind of giggling because I think I've addressed this maybe on my own personal podcast, but maybe I've addressed it here when we talk about nicknames. I don't like when someone I hired a guy at my old job, and I'll say his name is Steve, and he was like, "But you can call me Cap," and I said, welcome aboard, Steve. Like I don't know what you did. You haven't earned that to me to me yet. Like I get real tough. Like, don't tell me your nickname, Captain America. Like whatever. You're Steve. So it's not as a 1-to-1, but I'm laughing because I kind of think that applies to this of like, you walk in the room, you're like, here's Death's Whale. Like, to time out, buddy. Like, you haven't done. Who are you? Like, I don't know your story.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole conversation is there's this balance between everybody has the right to build their own identity, and if the weapon is an extension of yourself and you're building that identity, there's some positives there that we're going to talk about. But then there's that also like that stepping into telling other people what to think. Like if I was working with somebody and they're like, okay, my nickname is greatest ever. Like, I want to respect your choices, but I feel like you're also infringing on my choice to decide whether or not you're the greatest ever.
Yeah. And again, like with you, like you are Joseph, not Joe. We've had that conversation here. Like that, if that's not like, well, you haven't earned Joseph from me, but like what you're talking about is exactly that. There's some kind of self-made myth around some of that stuff. I don't know. I'm with you on it.
Complex thoughts about there's this line between declaring identity, believing in yourself, telling people I believe that I'm good and I believe that you should treat me with respect, treat me with assume that I am competent, but I also have a burden to prove that to other people. I can't just come in and give myself the greatest ever pin. Yeah,
we went to some wonderful spots already here, but I'm with you.
Yeah. Complicated stuff. But let's get into the positivity of it. I do think that James has a great point that I could see wonderful Jedi tales where it is not about ego-based myth building or trying to instill fear, right? I could see a Jedi who's just like, it's my instinct or my culture of origin to name everything out of love and excitement, right?
Yeah.
There's even that great passage in High Republic, right, where the ships are all supposed to be, the Jedi ships are supposed to be interchangeable. You're supposed to be like, just jump in whichever one's in the hangar. We're not about possessions. But Bell kind of likes one in particular and kind of has a nickname for it, and you probably shouldn't. But it's so flowing from who Bell is, right? And it isn't vanity or ego. So I can see a great story of a young Jedi who just like, my Kyber called to me. I'm going to honor their sentience. I feel in my gut it's Winky. My Kyber's name is Winky, so like this is my blade Winky, you know?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the Bell thing. I thought that was a fascinating take on it because he also forms that bond with the Charhound, right? And
with Ember the Charhound,
Ember, and even that's something the Jedi might be like, I don't know about that, and that's why I say some rebellious kind of rule bending Jedi, because I think we are talking about some of the negative side effects, but attachment in itself is not the problem, right? It's part of what's going on with the Jedi Order. It's maybe how it grows and how you remain attached to it. I don't know some of the bigger stuff there, but I like this idea of just like, no, I'm honoring this thing that I'm working with that is also of me, and you can also maybe one of these Jedis would be like, hey, it's also fun, okay? These are personalized weapons.
No. And I like that. That's why I like Quinlan Voss in Clone Wars, this idea that he's just a little bit more of a fun-loving Jedi, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I can see, Quinlan Voss naming his blade, out of fun,
Yeah.
So I can see lots of positives to it, but I also see why the Jedi in general would be like, ooh, do we need to do that?
Yeah. And look, if it was a question of let Jedi name their lightsabers or have the Order collapse, I'm sure we'd start seeing blades be named, right?
Yeah. I mean, because the whole attachment thing is, it's fine to be attached as long as you can let it go. So, could Jedi let go Winky the blade?
Yeah. Can you let go of Winky? That's the question.
Let go of Winky. I'm going to throw this bonus question on top of James's wonderful question. If you had a lightsaber, Ken, what would you name it?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'd like to go, even though Buckets of Blood's not like my favorite name in High Republic. I'll respect to Daniel Jose Older and his character he created. I would like my lightsaber to be like the Glow of Justice, some kind of long, formal name. Like when you have your dog is registered for show, like you have a show dog.
The Glow of Justice. That's really nice. I like that. So I do have the lightsaber that I built at Galaxy's Edge back in 2019. So I was thinking like, what would be a good name for that? And this just popped in my head that I want my lightsaber blade to be known as the Cautionary Tale.
There you go.
Because it sounds cool, but then when you're listening to it, it's like, wait, is the lightsaber going to deliver a cautionary tale? Did he learn a cautionary tale by using the lightsaber poorly? Yeah. There's lots of different ways to interpret it.
Yeah. That just, it's not unlike Rebel ships names versus Imperial Star Destroyer names. Like you'd know the heart of someone by their name.
Yeah. And I think I actually said a ship's name, Lightmaker, and it's one of the Hammerheads in Rogue One.
That's right. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So anyway, with that, we are going to take a quick break. Thank you for the wonderful questions on Twitter. And in a moment, we'll be getting to our questions from our patrons on Patreon. Back in a moment. And we are back to continue our Cues of the Force. We're going to get to some questions from our patrons on Patreon. This first one comes to us from Stephen Campbell. Stephen says, "Hello there, Ken and Joseph. I am a high school history teacher, and for the first time in my 7-year career, I have a class where a majority of the students like and show an interest in our favorite story in a galaxy far, far away. To incorporate my love for the franchise as well, I've used Star Wars to help explain the concepts of imperialism and fascism to my students. Additionally, while my class was learning about Napoleon Bonaparte crowning himself Emperor of France, one of my students said, 'That's just like Palpatine.' Oh, how proud I was. George Lucas and other creators have openly acknowledged how history inspired many Star Wars concepts and plot points, such as stormtroopers in the German SA, as well as the Battle of Endor and the Vietnam War. But I'm curious if there are any moments in the franchise where you've made your own historical connections. My personal example comes from my favorite Disney-era book, Bloodline, by Claudia Gray. If you recall, the novel dives into the workings of the New Republic and how the framers create a purposely weak government to avoid having another tyrant take control. This always makes me think of the Articles of Confederation implemented by the Americans following the Revolutionary War to avoid having another king. In both, the government inaction causes more issues to arise. I know Ken has consistently mentioned his love for history. The election of 1912 is a doozy, but I'm curious where else you two have made historical connections to the Star Wars galaxy. Thanks, and may the Force be with you. Great story, great question, and I think really the burning question that comes out of this is, Ken, have you finished that book about the election of 1912 that you've been reading for several months?
I did. Thanks to Star Wars books, I kept having to push that book down the road. Finally finished it, and I just feel with a history teacher writing this question, I suddenly felt nervous and like I had to give a book report. And I was going to blurt out, though not perfect, if Teddy Roosevelt had won, it would have changed the face of politics going forward, and progressive ideas would have been more accepted by Republicans. Yeah, I did finish it, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. How do you feel in general? This is a weird question, but I think it helps frame our conversation. How do you feel about the history education that you got in high school? Because it can be a place of, as we're seeing now, and certainly when I was in high school, a place where battles are waged, right? Is history to be questioned, or is it facts and dates, and the lessons learned from these historical events are accepted, period? That's what they are. Memorize them, repeat them. Or were you invited to question history and analyze it from multiple perspectives? Or did you feel like you were sort of said, this is the narrative, learn it, memorize it, tell it back to us?
Yeah, especially these day and age. Isn't this a wonderfully complicated question? But I think it deserves our attention, and it deserves some attempted answers from all of us. I think it's a mixed bag. I had a great history teacher in 8th grade. His specialty was the Civil War, including he was a Civil War reenactor. And so we really dived into that one. But some other history teachers, it was, I don't mean this to be completely snarky, but it's a little bit of the history is written by the victors. And I think that's been the key of, yes, I've always loved history. I think it's fascinating and blah, blah, blah. And I love learning all aspects of it here. But I think the last couple of years, I have become more, obsessed is a little bit of the word, but I'm digging to find the truth behind a lot of it. I do think that's changed me more than any other ways. I've made reference of things you don't learn or didn't learn or weren't taught to me in little suburb Kenny up in Central Coast, California, but the Watchmen did. That's problematic to me. And I don't think you should be afraid of it. There's a great guy on Twitter. I forget his name. I just started following, but like he does whiteboard things where he has lessons, and we're all constantly students, I guess. And he did a great thing. If you block out the full picture of history and you take one side of the board and you hide all these like cause and effects and riots and protests and the realities and blah blah blah. If you hide one side of it, it just looks like you have a great bit of history changing and growing and becoming better along the way. But if you don't talk about the other side, you don't get the full picture, and you don't see a lot of what you think is growth is actually reactions to people trying to get more of their own rights. It's just like this thing that kind of goes and goes and goes. So I'm fascinated with this and continuing to learn. I'm not an expert in any of this. I watch a great history based YouTube channel by a guy named Mr. Beat, not Mr. Beast. He was way before Mr. Beast, but Mr. Beat was a history and economics teacher. I think now he's a full-time YouTuber, and he does wonderful little bite-sized videos and some long-form videos of just I don't want to say down the middle because that's such a buzzword, but just like, hey, here's what actually happened. Like, here's this led to this and this. And, the election 1912 is very important. And Woodrow Wilson affected a lot of things in a negative way going forward. And all this kind of, I love that side of history. And that's what I'm affected. So to go back to the original question, I feel a little shortchanged looking back on what I was taught to. It was a little paint by numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fascinating, and I always want to understand where other people are coming from, because our experiences, when we're first taught history, I think help frame how we analyze this. And I had the absolute extremes of history. I was part of the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program, which is this sort of organized, not advanced placement. It was just sort of like, you can get, this international, baccalaureate extra diploma. And on a practical level, if you took tests and you passed and you scored well enough, you could skip some classes in college. So I was really lucky to be a part of that at this school I was at. So there were, classes that were in IB, and then there were the classes that were offered to all the students. And it was a very, very mixed school in every sense of people and economics, and people who were brand new to the community and people who were like fourth generation attending this high school wanting tradition. So it is a real soup of lots of different perspectives. And I really like history. I was lucky to have in the IB classes, specifically invited, encouraged to question and saying, this event happened. Now we want an essay of the social reasons it might have happened, the political reasons it might have happened, the financial reasons it might have happened, the cultural, like encouraged to look at it and analyze it. And then the IB was just starting up, so I ran out of those classes I could take, and I had to take general history classes. And there was like this incredibly tired, broken down teacher, clearly just having a hard life, would literally write on the board, Christopher Columbus discovered America in blank. And then he would fill it in 1492. And then he'd say, write it down. And then you'd write it down. And then he'd say, and all of our tests are open book. So all he was trying to get people to do is write down the dates. And, so it was not great. And then there was another teacher who became aware of what the IB history classes were and got angry about it. And he was like, I don't do that revisionist BS that your other teacher does. In this class, we know that Christopher Columbus discovered America, period. And stuff that turned out to be factually incorrect. Just so those extremes of the rigid, this is the way it was, and we all know not just the events, but the narrative truth of them, versus let's look at it from lots of different perspectives, was so important to the way that I look at the world. Yeah.
You and I could probably do a separate History ForceCenter podcast. I'm fascinated by this and the challenging of it, and how I just finished that 4-part Abraham Lincoln talk on Apple. I highly recommend that one, where it does kind of challenge the notion of he's not necessarily the great emancipator. He's also not necessarily not. You have to actually engage with how he got there, why he got there, the compromises he was willing to make, some of the beliefs he had, and you actually confirm some great things about him. And then you are challenged by some of the other notions, because just calling him this great emancipator and he's the statue you go stand in front of, which, by the way, I have, and it is kind of moving. It really covers up a lot of stuff. And not on him, not on Lincoln, but just like you're really cleaning up that period of time. And it's just fascinating. And I think it's important. And Star Wars, going back to Star Wars, is something that, by taking real world stuff, maybe it's a softer approach to analyzing real world histories that some people might need. And I think I, at times in my life, probably needed that.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think often it can just be, history can be presented as this logical arc of like, well, there was a problem, so then this person came along and fixed it. And like, Yeah, that happens sometimes, but mostly it's a messy, weird combination of strange human needs,
Yeah. Yeah.
good and bad that lead to change,
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So with that background, let's get into this question from our Star Wars loving history teacher about the moments in Star Wars that sometimes fire off connections to real life history in our minds. Where do you go?
So I go, I apologize, it's not one particular moment, but I start with the High Republic. And I've said this before on the show, so to remix it, and I'll try to focus my comments a little bit here. But the High Republic for me is strongly connected to the post-war boom of America. And I don't mean to make it just American centralized. We have a lot of people all around the world listen to us. But for me, I always say it's the Eisenhower building the freeways, which is a big generalization of that time and some of the stuff around that. But it is, to me, a country that appears to be in a time of peace post-war, though we have the Korean War and all that stuff there as well. And it needs to be brought together a bit more. The reason I go to the freeways, you look at Chancellor Lena So and her great works, and you're trying to, the hyperspace routes aren't as solid, aren't as present. It's harder to get around the galaxy. And that's America post-war. The suburbs were growing, but it was different worlds, and we were spread apart. And there's this let's kind of connect, grow, and go big. And so it's this supposed time of peace and a big chance to get it right from the late 40s to about 1968, which is a big year of upheaval. We have these great changes, a lot built from the idea of, like I said, connecting with us, making us stronger. But it doesn't necessarily quite work, and it doesn't go smooth. And you have groups fighting a lot of change along the way. You have maybe at times well-intentioned government not doing it all right. You have old wounds and perceptions that are not easily going away. And that breeds to something like the rise of the Nile. And I just have loved the Nile, particularly in the light of the Jedi and how they're presented at the beginning of I don't know, there's certain, to me, it's always been groups connecting with real world groups with a lot of political overtones. But it's the play on those who feel disenfranchised and most likely aren't actually that, because someone has taken their honest experiences and needs and problems and inflamed them and infused fear into them and pushed them forward in ways that are destructive to the society that's trying to grow in good ways. And those fires have absolutely been stoked by fear, by the leaders grabbing for power. You look at Marquion Rowe, and now as you learn more about him. And I was haunted by the Nile, very much haunted by the Nile, especially in a post-January 6th world. And all that kind of connecting, and how Eisenhower was as a kid, I had to do a book report on Eisenhower, and so I've always been fascinated by him. And he's a pretty interesting character as a president, and as someone who was once courted by both the big parties at the time. And again, I never believe any leader is perfect, but there's some good things happen. But you look back at the time, man, it's just easy to say some good things happen, and you don't look at the whole picture. And I think all that is present in the High Republic. And they sold it as Camelot, not Camelot of King Arthur. We said this before, but the Camelot days of Kennedy in the 60s in this Brave New World, that all goes to bleep, right? And that's kind of what's happening to me in the High Republic era, the outer rim versus the core worlds, which to me is just kind of also urban versus rural. It's different needs and people trying to unite them all. Lena So has good intentions, but is it going well? And then I was reading, Charles Soule had a great comment on the High Republic of just, he says, I think we're seeing this now in the world we're living in, which is that disasters are large-scale catastrophes that test systems. The way you can see the strength of a system, a government, a society, of its tools against the scope and scale of that catastrophe is to throw a disaster at it. And that's kind of the beginning with the Jedi. So that's just a big Star Warsy way of just kind of analyzing this. To me, there's a lot of other areas you can connect it, but it's America post-war for me, post World War II.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. And I think there's a lot of that there. I think the High Republic to me is this amazing stew of 20th century politics, but at least from our lens, American politics in particular. Yeah. I think for me, the way that Lena So has this ambitious agenda of creating actual real physical things that will really physically make a difference, but are in its entirety of the package also pitching a philosophy of connection, humanity, we're all in this together. The fact that she's kind of called them the great works always make me think of, more rebuilding from the Depression going into World War II and FDR's New Deal, right? Yep. To really say, like, this is this is changing the framework. And I'm telling you, it's changing the framework. I'm not making the argument that we're going back to the good old days, which is so often the political argument. I'm making the argument that we all deserve better. Here's the new deal. Here's the great works. Here's all the things we're going to do together. And it's going to put everybody to work, and we're going to be in this together. I think there are elements of that for me in the High Republic that I'm really fascinated by as well. And I think have some rhythms with some of the political perspectives being in arguments being made today of this all can be better if we're not afraid of change. If we can trust each other and work together, maybe some things should be different. Some things should be questioned so they could be made better. All that kind of stuff is definitely there. I think this is being discussed in Stephen's question. The number of different sort of World War II influences in Star Wars, but one that's always really grabbed me, and I'd love to see even more storytelling about. It's there in Bloodline. It's implied by the sequel trilogy, but there's this sort of policy of appeasement, in the real world in the lead up to World War II, right? Of this can't be happening again. We called it the war to end all wars, it can't be happening again. It can't be the rallying of the saber of the same country again. Obviously it's far more complicated than just Germany and all that. But just as a simple way of that, like, we don't want this to happen again. We so don't want this to happen again that we are convincing ourselves it can't happen again. It won't happen again. And like treating Leia in Bloodline is an alarmist and a warmonger, right? Yeah. I think I respond to that. I think it's the reason that I respond. It's a different era and kind of a smaller version of that big picture. Can't happen again. So I'm just going to say, la, 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 it's not happening again. It's why I love Noor Jabel so much in the Rogue One scene where he said, Death Star, it's nonsense, right? It's this desire to not have that ugly and awful of a fight in front of you. So you just deny that it's even happening. And I think that has happened with some of the rise in just hatred that we're seeing now in, refreshed, reinvigorated, exposed anti-Semitism and violence against anybody who is perceived as being different in any way. The amount of laws and physical attacks on LGBTQ plus people, right? And when that was simmering in some of the language that was being used by Trump, there was a real don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate. He's just a showman. He's just talking tough. Don't exaggerate. And I think there's strains of that in a lot of Star Wars storytelling as well.
I think of that Mon Mothma conversation.
Yep. And as we always say, we want to be respectful that politics is sometimes not the most fun conversation, but we also want to be respectful that Star Wars is political. So acknowledging that. The other one that is not for me one specific story, but it's this general story of the true horror on a galactic scale of the Empire, right? We've got the personal Palpatine is, an evil wizard out of, fantasy, cackling and shooting lightning from his danger fingers and all the things that he represents personally for Vader and for Luke. But the true evil of the Empire is that they take over they take everything, right? Specifically the resource game that I think has been highlighted so well in the sequel trilogy, in the Bad Batch right now, in Solo, that idea of we can come and decimate your culture and society because you have something that we want for our own personal and financial gain. I think, the backstory of Rose Tico of her Planet of Haze Minor, I think Kenobi's reflections on what Mapuzo used to be like, but in particular Aldhani, right? To see that this specific space is so meaningful to this culture and it is being systematically destroyed. I think for me, I have what I think about a lot is I worked at this great museum in Minneapolis for several years called Mill City Museum. It's on the banks of the Mississippi River on the waterfall St. Anthony Falls that was known by Europeans forever not forever, but from when it had been reported, called St. Anthony Falls because of the person who first noted it and called it that. Obviously, the people who lived there called it something else. But for years and years, there was this like, who among the rich and elite of Eastern United States is going to make it out there to this falls because it's valuable, it's power, we can make money off of it. And the reason Minneapolis exists where it does is because this guy named Franklin Steele, who was kind of this charming son of wealthy people who was kind of going out into the wilderness to try to stake his claim, was the one who successfully staked the claim and then was able to sell all the riparian rights, the water power rights, and the flour mills grew up there. And that's why Minneapolis exists. And you can look at it as just like, it's such complex history, right? Of in the museum tells all of the history and from all the different perspectives. That's where Betty Crocker and the Pillsbury Doughboy were born, literally. They weren't literally physically born, but that's where Pillsbury in the company that becomes General Mills, the Washburn Crosby company, all start there. So there's just so much history. There's so much perspective. But at the end of the day, almost all of it is because somebody else came and said, this spot has physical power and it can give us power and we're going to take it.
With disdain.
Yeah. So we've gone lots of interesting places here on our Cues of the Force episode. But great start, thought starter from Stephen. Do you have any other thoughts, Ken?
No, I know it is wonderfully complicated. I also think it's part of what is a bit of the great divide that's going on. I think a lot of friends in my current generation were Gen X, but a lot of us are not talking to their parents as much. And a lot of it I find comes at, a lot of things you taught us, believed, everything are not what they all seem to be at the time. And that's, there's a great divide versus just, you think one thing and I think another. That's where a lot of tension is popping up, I think. And so it's valuable, and the history is so valuable in that regard.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it's important to be studied from and analyzed and discussed from multiple perspectives. So you can, and this is so much baked into Star Wars too, of like, look to the past so you can figure out what you want the present to be, so you can make an active choice. Yep. All right. Thank you for the great question, Stephen. We're going to move on to our final question from Justin Jacobson. This is another heavy political question. No, it's not. It's a fun question. Justin says, bright sons, Ken and Joseph, in the first season of The Bad Batch, the family rescues and befriends the baby Rancor named Moochie on one of their jobs. What weird and wonderful creature would you like to see them connect with in the new season? Or Gullet would be appropriate, since he is bored with the Imperial impression, but the galaxy is so full of fun and fantastical fauna. I would like them to adopt a bantha and name him Banthafet. And I would love to hear what you would like to see. All right, Ken, what do you want to see?
The very serious question here. No, it's a great one, Justin. Bring back a Dianoga, but have Omega connect with it a little bit. That from a certain point of view story, it's fascinating, but also not my favorite at the same time. Complicated feelings about it, but I love it in one regard. And that Dianoga in the trash compactor connecting with Luke, even though Luke doesn't really know what's going on. I would love that with Omega. It doesn't have to be around the Force. I'm just saying, just like she, of course, would be the one to see it as a creature, not as a trash trailer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I'd really spend some time with them would be great, and see the full body on screen.
That's it.
And also just hear Omega say Dianoga in that wonderful accent.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so there's I have a couple of choices. That'd be that's my first gut reaction.
Yeah, I got two choices, so I'll share my first one and we'll kick it back to you. My favorite selection, I think, is a possibility. I think there's a glimmer of hope. I believe that there's a possibility it's been glimpsed in the trailer for Bad Batch Season 2, but that is Zillo Beast. Yes. Man, those episodes of Clone Wars are so great, getting into the heart of the giant monster King Kong kaiju storytelling and everything that it can mean, and have that great cliffhanger of Palpatine gonna figure out its power and see how it can be used. Man, it fits thematically so well for Bad Batch, of another creature, another being who's been manipulated for the Empire's use and maybe thrown away. So, man, I'd love to see that.
I'm right there with you. I wrote down "Save the Zillo Beast." It absolutely connects thematically, right, with what happened there, Palpatine and everything, and there it would make a lot of sense. So that's a big one. I'm going a little smaller scale. I'm going to face old wounds that I have, and I want Wrecker to adopt a puffer pig that he names Poof. Work through some things and get to appreciate those puffer pigs even more than I used to.
Yeah, no, I can see with absolute blessing of the puffer pig, Wrecker like tying a belt around a puffer pig and then being like poof and then diving out of a ship and floating like a balloon like Violent Mary Poppins.
Yeah. Look at it when you poke it, it poofs up and have to poof. Yeah.
Oh, I would love that. Watching those puffer pig episodes again in my Rebels rewatch, they're bonkers and I really like them.
Yeah, so there you go. Those are my choices.
My final choice is a Vractal. I really, really like the design of the Vractals. I like Boga in particular. I love that they're the lizards with a little bit of a feathery plumage. I love their absolutely bizarre sound design. I love the way they've been built out in the publishing side of Star Wars canon, as they are excellent racers and that you can really make a bond with them and respect them, all that things. I think they'd be my answer to any question of anywhere in Star Wars, Mandalorian, whatever else you want a known creature to pop back up again. I'd be like Vractal, but at the risk of making everything too interconnected. Can you imagine if the Bad Batch go on a mission and find a wounded but surviving Vractal named Boga, and Boga becomes part of the Bad Batch crew, and then eventually they hook up with Cody after he has deserted the Empire and realized what he did was wrong, and reconnects with the Vractal he cruelly shot down.
I love this. That'd be a deep and emotional episode.
Wait, what's this Vractal's name? Not Boga.
Oh, it's beautiful. That's touching.
I'm both joking and serious. Probably a little too interconnected, but I would love that if Boga survived.
What's your animal's name? Mine's Poof. Yeah.
It's Boga. Yeah. So great question on the animals that we would like to see. That's it for our questions, but we do have a Power of the Light Side entry. We put a post out for patrons on Patreon asking them to share something that they love about Star Wars or a positive experience. We have another thoughtful essay. It is a little on the longer side, which is fine with us, but we want to let listeners know to buckle up. Here we go. You ready, Ken?
Yes, sir.
This comes to us from Jared Kozal. Jared says, one of the greatest lessons I've taken from Star Wars has been the power of keeping a clear and open mind. Last month, with the anniversaries of The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, I found myself reflecting on how my relationship with those three movies, all of which I dearly love, has evolved since I first started to engage with them. And specifically, the character of Rey. In the lead up to The Force Awakens, there was great emphasis in the marketing on the films returning to the tone and style of the original trilogy. While I was excited, I also found myself apprehensive and defensive because I'm ultimately, in my heart, a prequel kid. As such, anytime I encountered a fan whose anticipation for the sequel trilogy seemed to focus on how much not like the prequels it was, my own enthusiasm, unfortunately and irrationally, darkened. I remember most clearly listening to a now defunct Star Wars podcast, Far, Far Away Radio, that was reviewing the second The Force Awakens trailer, ending with Chewie, We're Home. It remains a great trailer, but it's notable that none of the new main characters, Rey, Finn, or Poe, have any dialogue in it. It's mostly images and vibes. As I was listening to the podcast, one of the hosts voiced the following opinion. I know we haven't seen much of her yet, but Rey is already one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. Their opinion was voiced honestly, with a spirit of sincere excitement, but when I heard that, I'm ashamed to say my eyes rolled so far back into my head, I thought they'd stay there. How could Rey already be someone's favorite character, I thought cynically. We haven't even heard her speak yet. In my entrenched mindset, it seemed another performative celebration of the old is new again tone and a dig at the prequels. It was my mind focused on the darkness instead of the light. Still, I remained cautiously excited for The Force Awakens, and I was there on opening night like everyone else. Right before I settled into my seat, I thought about that arms folded response I'd had to that trailer reaction and made a choice that on first viewing, I did not want to have that be my experience. So consciously and with some effort, I set aside all my fears and my resentments over the Back to the Originals marketing and perceived insults, like the aforementioned podcast, and promised myself I would keep an open mind and heart to whatever awaited me. And lo and behold, I fell in love. And the moment that fully captured my heart, the beautiful, wordless introduction of Rey, accompanied by John Williams' instantly iconic theme. I was enthralled by this scrappy scavenger, eking out a lonely and repetitive existence amid the ruins of the past while hoping for something more, but fearing to go out and seek it. It was one of the best pieces of visual storytelling I'd ever seen. I was all in on Rey as a character, and I hadn't even heard her speak yet. Of course, Rey goes on to speak plenty during the sequel trilogy. She finds more than her voice. She finds her power, her peace, her purpose, and her family. I won't recount her entire emotional journey here. We've all seen the movies, but I will say that every beat of it felt true and honest and earned to me and resonated with me powerfully, whether it was all planned out or not. And when she speaks her final words in the saga, for now, taking her name as Rey Skywalker, my smile was wide, my eyes were full of tears, and my heart was full. I felt I had just experienced true catharsis, and I left the theater deeply satisfied. And as I was driving home reflecting on the movie and the entire trilogy, I found myself unbidden thinking about that podcast and the person who had declared before the movie was even released that Rey was already one of their favorite characters. And I couldn't help but enjoy a good laugh at myself. Here I was almost 5 years later, ready to declare that Rey Skywalker had become my favorite character in all of Star Wars. To think that if I'd kept my heart locked away in fear and resentment when I sat down to watch The Force Awakens for the first time, I might never have allowed myself to embrace a character in a story that has given me so much inspiration and joy. And with that, a fresh wave of gratitude washed over me, and that smile and those tears returned. So, unnamed podcast host, wherever you are, I owe you an apology. Always in motion is the future, but you saw the light on the horizon that at the time I did not want to see. Whether or not Rey lived up to your hopes and you ultimately found her journey as powerful or meaningful as I did, I hope you're still keeping your heart and mind open to new stories and characters in the galaxy far, far away. Beyond those twin suns, someone's new favorite character is waiting to start their journey. And if you're ready to risk taking your first step into a larger world with them, that someone just might be you. Well said, Jared. Official Star Wars ForceCenter t-shirt. Well said. That is a great journey and a great demonstration of what we I think kind of discovered and talk about for ourselves here, of trying to make sure that we are approaching things open in an open way and realizing that we are taking some of ourself and our energy into every story we watch. Ken, what are your thoughts?
This is a wonderful little essay here, Jared. It was epic. It was grand. And it captures a lot of where my heart is right now in Star Wars, and has been since 2015. And leading up to Force Awakens, I don't think Jared's wrong, actually. I think I was part of the people saying, finally, move away from that prequel look. Am I right? Am I right? And I didn't mean it to be harmful, but it is. I think the prequel generation has gained a louder voice in the last few years. And Jared's starting point, I understand that defensiveness. That's something that I think I even battle these days, the Andor discourse and everything, where I found myself ready to attack something I loved, which is the Andor show, because I was so defensive of other things. So I get that, and that's a starting point. But yeah, when you open up your heart to the journey. Rey's a great character. It was important, a great example as a character, and is a great character. It was part of my starting point too, where I always kind of described it, where Rey for me was one of the first times where I didn't look at the character as like a contemporary or a colleague, right? Like she was someone I felt protective of, and I engaged with her journey in a different way. And that doesn't happen if I sit there with my arms folded in the theater. It would be, my interaction with that character would be a lot different if I was just like, ain't for me. And when the point is, it ain't for me. And I think I'm with you, Jared, on that. And then also the other point being, when you're open to it and you follow that journey that's maybe designed for someone else, you do discover a lot of stuff that is for you. You've always said, Joseph, I want to grow up and be like Rey. I think it's a great way to look at the character. And there's so many other characters that you can find that with in the sequel era, not just the trilogy, but the era.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you, and I really agree with this great essay by Jared. I think it's a fun footnote in the entire history of Star Wars and our relationship with it. I just rewatched the Kenobi series, and part of my joy of that is just celebrating that it exists and that we live in a world where this kind of direct sequel to the prequels, and Obi-Wan and Anakin, being together again, and that being a thing that is celebrated. It still feels like a gift to me because around the time of The Force Awakens, it was a little bit in the marketing, right? Of X-Wings are back, TIE fighters are back. The original 3 are back, which is great. A huge amount of presentation of models and puppets are back, not all this CGI, right? Yeah, and it really was a little bit of I was fully on board and vocally loving the prequels by then, and even I was like, yeah, I grew up with the original trilogy. Could you stop? Basically, those subtweeting the prequels, please, in your advertising. And I understand exactly what Jared's saying. It's an interesting footnote in Star Wars history, and I'm glad that the prequels have been embraced. In fact, a quick funny story from Disneyland. I kept seeing young people with Obi-Wan and Anakin T-shirts, just celebrating Obi-Wan and Anakin. And a woman walked by with a great Obi-Wan and Anakin shirt, and I went, ooh. And my wife was like, I know that you're making that noise about the shirt, but maybe don't look at people and go ooh out loud, because I know it's about the T-shirt. But you might accidentally look creepy. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even know I made the noise out loud. I'm so sorry.
You're Steve Martin and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Nice. No. Don't do
Not what I meant at all. Yeah. But yeah, the gift of going in with your arms open is so wonderful, because then you find what's there for you. And hey, if the thing doesn't work, great, that's fine. But deciding ahead of time that it doesn't work is just, to me, cutting off a path to joy from yourself.
Indeed.
Yeah. And also very much agreed on all things Rey. I think she's a great character, and I think her arc across the films is really clear and really, really moving to me. Yeah. All right, Ken, any more thoughts before we wrap up?
No, great stuff. Wonderful share. We appreciate that, Jared.
Excellent. And as always, I feel the need to give the caveats when we get more explicitly political, that, hey, I know that's not for everyone, but sometimes it is going to happen. And we need to be willing to embrace that, embrace Star Wars as a political thing, and talk more openly about it from time to time. With that said, Ken, where can people find us?
You can find us on Twitter at ForceCenter Pod. We're on Hive Social at ForceCenter. We're on our Facebook page as well at ForceCenter Podcast. We're available on, we're also Instagram and YouTube, as you know. Podcasts available all over the place. Just search, you'll find us, but you can find us on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, among other spots. Merch available at tpublic.com/user/ForceCenter. And you can support us directly at patreon.com/ForceCenter. From there, you can get into our Discord, where Jared's there. A lot of folks are there sharing stories like these, connecting and celebrating, and also, questioning parts of it to find what's there for you and everything. It's a great, wonderful community of Star Wars pleasant discourse. So check it out through our Patreon page. Follow me at Ken Napzok, or go to my website, kennapzok.com, for more, for things like my music show, Pop Rock Radio, or my podcast, The Blathering, where if I said anything today that offended you, maybe don't listen to that one. But if you like it, head on over to The Blathering on the Napzok Network. Joseph, you.
Yeah, you can find me on all the social media, Instagram in particular. I would love to find some more friends over on Instagram, but I'm also still on Twitter, on TikTok, all sorts of places. Handle at Joseph Scrimshaw. And of course, you can go and find me on YouTube. I'm be putting more stuff there soon, so you can search for Joseph Scrimshaw on YouTube. But for now, for myself, for Ken, for our lightsabers with names, this has been Cues of the Force.